Good afternoon and welcome to this session on online holistic assessment, which is in collaboration with Google. I welcome all the teachers of CBSE affiliated schools, as well as the Google team and Ms. Deepti Sahani from Mahatattva. And this program has been launched by circular number 97 dated 12th October. And as per this circular, it has got series of webinars, 4 webinars on different dates on 22nd, 26th, 29th, and 1st of November. And these 4 webinars will be dealing with different aspects of assessment. So I would request all the teachers to join all the 4 sessions to benefit from it. And at the end of these sessions, and this program and this course is also there on Google Classroom, they can join it, do the assessment, and they can get the certificate. So before I hand it over to the Google team, I would request Dr. Biswajit Saha, Director Training and Skill Education, to address us. Dr. Saha.
Thank you, Ramaji. Good afternoon, everyone. So after this is actually festival month, and so my greetings to all the teachers community, the members from Google, Deepti, and her team members, and of course my colleague from CBSE, and the teachers community who have joined us virtually from the different part of the country, as well as some teachers who have joined us from abroad. So one way festival and looking into the other dynamics, but other way the teachers are also preparing themselves for assessment, because the Diwali, post Diwali, this board has already announced some sort of assessment would be carried out, and that is also for the first time the term 1 is going to happen, a kind of semester systems, a kind of a new role of assessment in terms of both online, offline, blended, hybrids. All those terminologies are definitely coming across, and we are also in many forums using. So this month we started this special MOOCs on holistic assessment, and I think Deepti ji and her teams will take you through. So one way because last week I was reviewing the different online courses which are available in Google platform as well as in Diksha. The performance wise, some of the programs, especially on FLN, experiential learning, competency based education, and now this storytelling pedagogy, then now this assessment. In Google platform, I have seen the number of enrollment is less. So my humble request to all the teachers who have joined us through virtual platform, please look into this. If you have already completed, fine, no worries. You don't have to look into the platform again and again. But both Diksha platform as well as Google platform, you see whichever is possible. Our request is to complete the course. Now, on holistic assessment, because the dynamism is towards personalized adaptive learning. Now, then that meaningfully holistic assessment would be cater the purpose of individual ability, and one can address through this blended approach of educations. Now, there are certain stringent with reference to the board assessment or board-led program. But 1 to 8, because this program is not only for class 10th or 12th assessment, it is rather catering the horizon of 1 to 8, 9 and 11, and of course 10th and 12th. So that way, the flexibility which lies in the teacher's hand in terms of doing the assessment for between 1 to 8, also for 9 and 10, one way the guidelines of CBSE, but 1 to 8, absolutely you are autonomous. You can drive in your own way. Ultimately, whether the child has conformed with the learning objectives or learning outcomes, that is the main agenda in NAP. Now, how you are supposed to do it, it is not that ball game always in a benchmarking basis, the batch-based assessment, which usually happen in the school, which usually happens in the board-based assessment. I think some way we have to come out from that mode to some other alternative mode which serve the individualistic requirement, no matter how many times you are, because for just for the sake of routine, for the sake of timetable, it is always preferred that in a certain window you are doing the assessment, and maybe this is an assessment week. But if some students are not ready to do this kind of assessment, I think rescheduling the window, it is very much in the hand of the teacher. And now, in a blended approach, I think it is no longer that rigidness and that kind of trouble in reference to scheduling physically the separate assessment. Those days are gone. So, in a hybrid way, how functionally we can really make the assessment holistic so that it serves the purpose of assessment for learning or assessment of learning. So all these things we need to deeply think through, and innovations will come only when every individual teachers who have joined this cohort can come up with their own idea, their local requirement, and if need be, after the programs, we can drive for a Google community for making really the assessment holistic, and everybody can share, every teachers can share their own experience, and which is doable, which is not doable in your local context, and some other teacher will look into these things, and if some things are really conducive and it is beneficial for their community, they can use it. And so that the concept, and through that way, I think over a period of 1 year, a different standards we can set, and ultimate objective is that learning outcomes achieves, no matter what way. But at the end of the year, that achievement is the success stories of holistic assessment. With this, let me thanks the Team Google for supporting CBSE in this mission. And of course, Deepti ji, after your that success stories of the first program, I think this is second challenge which our teachers community will definitely enjoy in the program and try to be more interactive because it is a blended way. Of course, somebody should look into all the chat boxes and all, or regularly update the teachers in that manner. Thank you. And of course, thanks goes to my internal team who are very much involved in these projects. Thank you very much, and all the best to all the teachers who have joined us virtually. Please enjoy the session.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Saha, for your encouraging words. And definitely, we hope that teachers will be empowered through this program to achieve the desired goal of this program. And before I invite ma'am, I would just like to inform our participants that the link for classrooms, they can access through the circular which is there, and it is a link of cbscblogspot.com, and they can join only through the CBSE Digital Edu ID only, which they will be having, and the assessment links for respective classrooms will open only from 1st of November. So there is a help mail support@cbscdigitaledu.in. But before, yes, somebody is saying anything? Yeah, before you go to that mail for asking for help, you must go through the circular and see all the details. And you can also download your certificate after you have completed your assessment from 30th November onwards from the training portal of CBSE. So, with these words, I invite Puchika ma'am to carry it forward from here for introduction of our resource person and Mani ma'am. Puchika.
Thank you so much, ma'am. A very good afternoon to everyone and welcome to the launch of CBSE Holistic Assessment webinar. I'm Puchika Nirav, Manager Google Projects at Mahatattva, and I'm delighted to introduce you to our team. So first, I would like to introduce Ms. Bani Patel Dhawan, Head of India in South Asia, Google for Education. Ma'am, if you would like to say some words, over to you.
Thank you. Namaskar, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to see another round of training taking place. Dr. Saha, thank you so much for your encouraging word. Dr. Sandeep, Sadesh ma'am, the entire team of CBSE, we are really indebted to your partnership and all the support that you have provided, both Google and Mahatattva. And of course to Team Mahatattva, led by Deepti ma'am. It's always a pleasure to learn from her, and we're looking forward to this session as well. I also thank my team that is present, and Sonia and Anshul, who work very closely with both the CBSE team and the Mahatattva team to make this possible. All I would want to say is that in these times where hybrid learning that Dr. Saha alluded to, blended learning, what we are really looking forward is that we are able to provide the kind of security and sensitivity to our students and to our children who are going to go through assessments. It's a tough year. किसी के लिए भी easy नहीं रहा है, and I am sure the burden of these assessments that they have to go through every year actually creates a lot of anxiety. My request to all of you is to adapt to the new normal, and we're all calling it that. It clearly needs to have the child at the center. Not only do we need to be empathetic, but we also need to evolve a new India that focuses on taking the best of technology and all of your wealth of knowledge as teachers. And I would say that we are very excited that the schools are opening and the students can be back in their secure environments, back at school. However, the reality of the situation is that we will continue into this hybrid world as we walk into 2022 as well. So our endeavor through this training is to provide you and facilitates what we call as embracing a more holistic approach to assessments, where we are able to introduce quality, balance, and child centricity. The intent would be that it is not about the end of year assessments. It's more about how you're able to continuously work with the student to not only put them at ease in terms of achieving the learning outcomes, but also make that child own their learning journey and not be anxious of whatever is ahead of them. Globally, a lot of systems have moved to a more hybrid form of assessments, and I congratulate CBSE for introducing this semester-based assessment system. And going forward, I am hoping that not only will technology support this view, the teachers, the school leaders, the parents, and the student will find that this way of providing an opportunity to students to actually own their journey and not be anxious about the year-end assessment actually benefits everybody in India. So thank you so much, and back to you, Puchika ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Very well said, actually. Now moving on to Ms. Deepti Sani. Ms. Deepti Sani is the Chief Executive Officer at Mahatattva, and she will be taking us on through this journey of holistic assessment webinars. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Saha, I would like to congratulate you for summing up the 4 webinars so well that I think my job has become much easier. The standard has been set really high, and I'm going to make sure that as a collective, as a community, we will ensure that the vision that CBSE has for assessment is actually followed through. So, Puchika, if you can start sharing the slides. Right. So, as we have spoken about, there are going to be 4 webinars, and today is the first one. And we want to put the perspective in place to say that when we are talking about assessment, we have to look at how do we define the goals of learning, but we keep the learning outcomes in mind. What is the child going to learn in this experience that I have designed for the child? Hence, the name of the webinar is Defining the Goals for Learning, Keeping the End in Mind. We are talking about skills and competencies. We are talking about how we can make the learning more progressive for our children. What are the experiences, the authentic experiences that we can give to the children so that they have a holistic, not only assessments that we do in the classroom, but the entire life that they engage in becomes holistic. So what are we looking at in the first webinar is that we are, if you can change the slide, thanks Puchika, we are looking at, when we are planning for learning, that is the most important thing in learning, that unless and until we do a blueprint, we do a planning for our learning, we really don't know what we're going to go and speak in the class or do in the class or engage with the children in class. So we will be talking about a very pertinent and important thing, and that is the difference between the learning goals and the learning objectives. How are they different? So when the teachers start writing their lesson plans, there is a lot of confusion between the two. So we thought we will talk about assessment in the 3 webinars, but we will talk about the core first. We will talk about what is a lesson plan or a concept plan and how does the assessment fit in. Then we will be talking about how do we write these learning objectives? How do we design the learning so that whatever we have planned for the children actually comes through? Then we will look at student-led learning, and NEP is, full of, instances where it talks about how the children need to be involved in the learning. And we say, yes, let us involve them in creating the rubrics as well. Let them know what the learning objectives are. Let them be, party to what criteria you are setting for the children. So that is something we will be talking about today. And finally, we are looking at skills and competencies because unless you are integrating that, you are not engaging them enough. And this is something that has to be an end product where the children are ready for the workspace. And like Dr. Saha said, that we are not talking about assessment of a certain area or a certain scope. We are looking at assessments for life. So hence, holistic assessments. So if you look at this figure that, was created after we had a lot of discussions on, what assessment should look like, or rather what learning looks like. So we are looking at the curriculum goals. We are looking at the learning objectives and the learning outcomes. These 3 things are something which will lead you towards that assessment. You should know what my goal is, what is that I need to understand and make my children understand, what are the learning objectives that have been set for a particular lesson, and what are the learning outcomes. And for all as I understand learning, the children should know what these learning objectives and learning outcomes are. And that is how you involve them in your learning. So if you look at the pyramid, the biggest and the omnipresence thing that is there is the curriculum. So that's your biggest, thing that you need to consider when you're talking about learning in the classroom. So what are the sequences that you have planned for your, the learning and the experience that's going to happen in the class? So what have you planned? And what is the sequence of that? Students, when they achieve proficiency in learning, how are they going to learn that? How are they going to get more proficient in their learning? What is the totality of the students' experiences? What are the goals? What are the objectives? What are the strategies? What resources are you going to use? And finally, what is that outcome of that learning that is happening in the classroom? This entire thing is your curriculum. So everything, including the paper for that you're going to use for a tangram, is included in your curriculum. Then we talk about the curriculum goals. When we talk about curriculum goals, they're a little generic, they're little broad, big picture sort of statements where we talk about, and I will be giving you examples of this. Once we have, deciphered this diagram, which will be shared with you in the Google Classroom, you will look at these in a different light once you understand these one by one. So we have the curriculum, which is the big picture. Then we have the goals. So goals are for your subject areas. What is, the children will develop a scientific temper. So that is something which is big picture. So it starts from foundation, nursery, KG, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and you actually expose the children so that the scientific temper doesn't stay in only class 3. It goes on till the child passes school, the college, and he has scientific temper for life. Once we move up from curriculum goals, we have the learning objectives. These are specific statements. They articulate what the children should be able to do as a result of a learning experience that you have designed for the children. So that is your very specific statement wherein you say, this is what the child is going to do by the end of this period of time. And mostly this is a class period, a 30 to 40 minutes period that the children actually have it. Once you have decided your learning objectives, you have to ensure that for those learning objectives, you have a pedagogy that is designed, not a pedagogy, but you have strategies which are progressive. The children are engaged. The children are talking to each other. The children are creating their own learning. They are constructing their own learning. So those are the progressive pedagogies that we will be talking about in the course of these 4 webinars as well. Finally, assessment. Now you see, you have to know the curriculum, you have to know the goals, you have to know the learning objectives, you have to know what kind of pedagogy to use. But what are those objectives? What are those assessment objectives for that assessment that you're going to carry out that the children will be able to do at the end of the strategy, at the end of the lesson that you've planned? And finally, you will be able to decipher and describe the learning outcomes as a result of this learning process. So this is something that you should have as a ready reckoner in front of you when you're going through and when you are planning your lesson, that how important each of these, we hear this in passing, but when we're sitting down and we are planning our lesson, this is something that we should have in front of us when we plan. How is that I'm going to integrate assessment? How is that related to the outcomes and all of that? So if you can change the slide, Puchika. So like I said, we are going to dwell a little more on the curriculum. So what is the curriculum? It is a sequence of planned experiences. Everything that you do in the classroom needs to be planned. It has to have some blueprint. You have to have some sort of a, plan of action, what's going to happen in the class. And I know that your class comes to a standstill when suddenly a child starts crying or has had a bad day yesterday and your entire planning goes away. That's all right. You can skip that day. You can have some activity for the child or the children who are being disruptive in the class. You can have some circle time, get them to understand what is happening around in their world, because that is important too. But in the long run, some planning needs to be there for you so that okay, today was an off day, but tomorrow I'm going to consider and continue with what I was supposed to do yesterday. But the planning is there. That is the most important thing, because when we talk about the curriculum, the disruption in the class on that day, that is also included in the curriculum. So the totality of the students' experiences is what consists of the curriculum. So it has your social behaviors, it has the content, it has the thinking skills, it has the competencies, everything is included in that curriculum. Next, please. So what are the goals then? So as we move up on the pyramid, we have the broad generic statements that, if you can see, it can be the same for the complete academic year as well. So they are bigger picture. They can be for the complete academic year, or it can be for the whole of your school life. So they are big picture statements that you have for your learning in the classroom, learning beyond the classroom as well. So we move on to learning objectives. Like I said, learning objectives are something which are, if you can just look at this, and this will give you the very, very sort of a clear picture. When you talk about to learn and to read English, to improve your vocabulary, to improve your reading, these are your big picture goals. The bigger, forum for what you're going to do in the language. But if you look at a specific goal, it tells you that you have to appreciate language and write a poem, very specific. So you will appreciate what language is, and you will, as a result, the artifact that you will produce will be a poem. You will read chapter 1 in your book. Most of these goals have been written in child speak because we share these with the children, and it's always better to have them in child speak so they understand what we are talking about. To record a page of chapter 1 in my own voice with the correct modulation. So this is something that, actually tells you what the broader and the narrow goals are. So we move on to the objectives. And in the objectives, I hope you are following me. We have done curriculum, we moved on to goals, and now we are on the specific statements that we are going to talk about when we design our learning. So these, like I said, are very, very specific statements. The students, they should be able to do something at the end of a learning experience, and these statements will define that. What are the children, what will they be able to do? So this is again a lot of research into the various statements that were given for learning objectives, and we thought this was the easiest and the most comprehensible statement which could be used, because if you look at the last few words of the statement, it says effective instruction planning. I find this phrase really, really important, that it has to be effective planning. That is what you're planning to do. Strategies, those are your activities and assessments. So all of them are taken into account when you are looking at the learning objectives. What are those learning objectives that you will define? What are those learning objectives that you will assess so that the learning outcomes that you had defined right at the beginning are actually achieved? So like we said, we are starting with the end in mind. Next, please. So the learning objectives that we have in mind should be defining the type and the depth of learning. What are the children expected to learn? What are they expected to achieve? That should be very well defined by the teacher, and if it is possible, in some instances with the children as well. Now, you have to look at, this is called chunking. Everybody's heard about it, and we know that Pat Wolf talks about how the children need a different activity, 7 to 8 minutes in a classroom. And now with the onset of this bombardment of multimedia in the child's world, that has become lesser. So how are you doing your chunking? How are you breaking down the task so that it is something that the children will comprehend? You will do a small formative assessment so that the children understand, yes, we have learned. The teacher understands, yes, the children have learned, and then they move forward. So how are you putting them in coherent units of learning so that the objective that you had set for this particular activity is achieved? You have to clearly communicate the expectation to the learner. So this is really advisable. The children should know what my expectation is. And I know from experience that if the children know that this is what the end product is going to be, they actually perform better because they know the the outcome. What is this artifact going to look like? And if you can add in rubrics into it, it becomes better because they know what good looks like. They know what in the rubric, if they have a criteria for presentation, they know if I'll get a 5 if my level of presentation is at this level. So we need to understand that the children need to be communicated. What are the communication expectations for this particular learning with which we have defined the learning objective for? We also have to give them a benchmark for formative, for summative, and a prior learning check. So what do they already know? It's always better, your tabula rasa, we talk about the child being a clean slate. Those are things of yesteryears. That's gone. Our children, when they are, this generation children, when they are 1 year old or maybe younger than that, they are exposed to so much of media that they are no longer tabula rasa, and you are no longer the, the saint and the prophet and the be all end all who's going to fill it up and write on the slate. The children today, they need to know what is that I'm going to learn, how am I going to be assessed for it, and what is it I already know about this in the class. So that is why differentiation is so much talked about, because every child is different and every child has a separate starting time, though the learning objectives for the child for all the children in the classroom will be the same, but they will have different starting points. And finally, when we talk about the learning, we have to make sure that the learning objectives guide and organize the learning, not only for the student, but for the teacher as well. Hence the importance of writing your lesson plans. So this is the nuance of writing why do we write a learning objective, keeping the end in mind. What is that my children in the classroom are going to learn at the end of it? So if you go next, again, this is an infographic that you can have as a ready reckoner. Sometimes we get very, very overwhelmed by things around us. But if we have learning objectives and they are smart, then we ensure that the children stay right on track. So the SMART learning outcomes is my learning objective, or the learning objectives that I have designed, are they SMART? So the S here stands for specific. Is there a description of a precise behavior or a situation that it will be performed in? So what are those conditions? Am I being very specific? This is what I will need. This is what the children will do. And is that really panned out for me and my children? Is it that specific enough? It is measurable. We are talking about assessments. I will not say that everything needs a formative assessment and a summative assessment, but yes, your assessment, formative assessment, can just be observation. It can just be children talking to each other. So it need not be like a formal assessment, but you should be able to measure that. What you are writing. So if there is a learning objective, it says the children will be able to write a poem, appreciate literacy. So that is something which you can see, it's tangible. So is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it achievable? So sometimes we set objectives which are actually not tangible at all. There's something which has a longer time duration for it to come through. And this is what leads to a lot of disappointment with the children, because they are not able to achieve it. And then it is a failure of the system, not the children. So whatever you are trying to do in your chunking, whatever you are trying to do in those 30 minutes, 40 minutes of your period, are those objectives achievable? So if you have 2 or 3 objectives for that lesson, it is okay. If you think there are 10 objectives and you want to deal with them in one day, it's not possible. It is your planning which is wrong. It's not that the children haven't achieved what was supposed to be achieved. The R stands for relevant. Is the objective that you have set, is it worthwhile for the learner? Is it even possible to achieve this? So is it relevant in the context that we're talking about? And time bound. This is something you all must have gone through in this COVID times, where you were so excited about using online tools and project-based learning. So time is something which just goes away, and we actually get so swayed by what the children are doing that we don't time certain things. And then teachers start saying, what, syllabus nahi khatam hua. So वो जो हमने syllabus की बात करी है कि syllabus हमने खत्म करना है, we don't have to cover it, we have to discover it, right, together with the children. So learning objectives is something that need to be smart. So we'll skip the next slide, Puchika, because of the internet connectivity. I'm not looking at that right now. We are looking at a few exemplars. So I'm going to take a pause for 2 minutes here, and I want you to read these 3 sentences. In 3 sentences को आप पढ़िए, और ये language based हैं, but कोई भी subject में आप इनको use कर सकते हैं. और अब सिर्फ इसमें एक चीज जो आपने नोटिस करनी है वो ये है कि ये learning objectives जो बने हैं ये smart हैं कि नहीं. Are they smart? Are they specific? Are they measurable? Are they achievable? Are they relevant? And are they time bound? So time bound, of course, will depend upon what activity that you have actually designed for it, but just read them. So very, very achievable, very simple sentences. Learners will write sentences that demonstrate the correct use of commas, semicolons, and periods. Learners will use apostrophes when and only when needed. Learners will use double and single quotation marks correctly in quoted material. Very simple learning objectives, something that you can give a sheet, a worksheet, and the children can actually demonstrate this. You can do pair assessment, let them, exchange their sheets, and you can very easily find out if this learning objective has been achieved or not. So simple and very explicit at this point in time. So if we go next, so when you are creating your lesson objectives, please make sure that you write strong learning objectives. So if you look at these statements here, does this statement describe what the students will be doing? So you have to know, what are the children going to do? Is it a GeoGebra activity? Is it a science experiment? Is it something that they're going to try at home? Does the statement use an action verb? This you must have done in your B.Ed as well, where we talk about the Bloom's taxonomy and how the the learning objectives move higher. We will be talking about them in a minute. But आपका जो learning objective जो आपने बनाया है, उसमें एक verb है कि नहीं, करने का जो word होता है उसमें बच्चे क्या करेंगे? जो आपने statement बनाई है वो crisp है और student centered है कि नहीं. And मेरी suggestion ये है कि जब आप learning objectives बनाते हैं तो ऐसे बनाइए that I will be able to, और बच्चे की लैंग्वेज में लिखिए कि वो क्या है. क्योंकि जब आप स्टूडेंट सेंटर्ड, स्टूडेंट लेड लर्निंग करते हैं तो आप लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स बच्चों को पकड़ाते हैं एंड में और कहते हैं कि अच्छा ये देखिए लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स इस लेसन के ये थे, आप अपने लिए ट्रैफिक लाइट कीजिए या चेकलिस्ट कीजिए कि ये जो ऑब्जेक्टिव्स हैं आपने अचीव करे हैं कि नहीं करे हैं. सो वो उसमें सेल्फ असेसमेंट में बच्चों की लैंग्वेज में अगर आई विल बी एबल टू डू दिस और आई will be by the end of this lesson I will be able to do that, वो बच्चों को थोड़ा सा easy लगता है, especially till class 8. आप अपने child speak में ये sentences लिख सकते हैं. So ये जो statement है ये measurable है कि नहीं. measurable पे मैं stress दूंगी क्योंकि ये webinars जो हम कर रहे हैं वो इसी पे कर रहे हैं, assessment पे कर रहे हैं कि वो जो आप बच्चों से लिखवा रहे हैं, करवा रहे हैं, जो भी काम बच्चा जो कर रहा है उसको आप कैसे बताएंगे कि वो बच्चे को समझ में आ गया? कैसे मेजर करेंगे आप? एंड फाइनली जो आपकी सोर्सेज ऑफ असेसमेंट हैं वो क्या है, आपको ये पहले से सोच के रखना पड़ेगा कि अगर मेरे ये 5-3 जो भी मेरे लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स हैं, इनको मैं कैसे असेस करूंगी या करूंगा। ये हम कैसे पता करेंगे कि हमारे बच्चों को ये बात समझ आ गई है। सो अगर हम देखें कि गोल्स जो हम बनाते हैं, जिनकी हमने बात करी, और लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स जो हम बनाते हैं, उसमें क्या डिफरेंस है। सो इफ वी गो नेक्स्ट पुचिका। सो गोल्स जो होते हैं, they reflect what you want your students to know and understand. They are vague and they are broad. Like I said, they are big picture. And the goals reflect the essential questions for your course or your discipline. So it is actually for your subject area. जो आपका डोमेन है, सब्जेक्ट डोमेन है, उसके बारे में हम बच्चों को बताते हैं कि इसमें ये हमारे सब्जेक्ट के या डोमेन के या डिसिप्लिन के या कोर्स के गोल्स हैं। और लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स जो हैं, दे हैव टू बी कनेक्टेड टू द गोल। आपने जो गोल्स अपने क्लास में डिफाइन करे हैं फॉर द होल ईयर, उसी को आपको अचीव करने के लिए अपने लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स जो हैं वो बनाने हैं, उसके साथ लिंक होना चाहिए। दे शुड रिफ्लेक्ट कि बच्चों ने इसमें करना क्या है। जो हमने लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स हैं, मैं आपको वही जो सब्जेक्ट मैटर है वो मैं आपको अलग अलग वे में सुना रही हूँ कि समझा रही हूँ, क्योंकि आपको वो अपने आप के अंदर इनग्रेन करना है। आपको वो समझना है कि ये चीज में क्या डिफरेंस है। उसके बाद जब हम आपको एक टेम्पलेट देंगे जो गूगल क्लासरूम में भी रखी है बनाने के लिए, और मैं आपको देने से पहले उसमें आपको दिखाऊंगी कैसे आज के सेशन में कि वो कैसे आपने सोचना है और कैसे आपने वो लिखना है। तो हमें वो मालूम होना चाहिए कि वो हमारे बच्चे जो हैं उसमें क्या करेंगे। जो लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव है उसमें, जैसे हमने स्मार्ट लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स बोले थे, वो मेजरेबल होने चाहिए, ऑब्जर्वेबल होने, टैंजिबल होना चाहिए। हमें दिखना चाहिए कि बच्चों ने ये कैसे क्या पढ़ा और वो कैसे अचीव किया। और जो लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव जो हम डिफाइन करते हैं वो इंडिविजुअलाइज्ड होने चाहिए बच्चों के परफॉर्मेंस के लिए। सो इट शुड बी वन एस्पेक्ट ऑफ स्टूडेंट परफॉर्मेंस। सो आपको एग्जाम्पल देने के लिए नेक्स्ट स्लाइड में आप देखेंगे कि जब हम लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव सेट करते हैं, नेक्स्ट स्लाइड पूछेगा, तो हम एक, आप फर्स्ट वाला देखिए स्टेटमेंट जो लिखा है, अपॉन कंप्लीशन ऑफ दिस कोर्स students will be able to read and write with a critical perspective. ये आपने दो चीजें डाल दी हैं, दो ऑब्जेक्टिव्स हैं वो आपने डाल दिए हैं। आपको इसको असेस करने में मुश्किल होगा। आपको जो डेप्थ में जाना है टू अंडरस्टैंड, इज द चाइल्ड एबल टू रीड और इज द चाइल्ड एबल टू राइट विद अ क्रिटिकल पर्सपेक्टिव। मतलब जैसे यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ बर्कले की क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग स्ट्रैटेजीज हैं, 4 स्टेप्स हैं, वो बच्चा वो कर सकता है कि नहीं। अगर आपने रीडिंग कराना है तो आप वो कराएंगे, अगर आपने राइटिंग कराना है तो नेचुरली आप उनको कुछ लिख के दिखाएंगे। राइट पर्सपेक्टिव जो आपका, राइट ऑब्जेक्टिव जो आपका होगा वो होगा, अपॉन कंप्लीशन ऑफ दिस कोर्स द स्टूडेंट्स विल बी एबल टू रीड। एक चीज लिया है कि बच्चे जो है वो रीड कर सकेंगे फ्रॉम अ क्रिटिकल पर्सपेक्टिव। दूसरा जो है, आप कभी भी जो बच्चे ने आर्टिफैक्ट बनाया है उसके साथ सक्सेस मत देखिए। जैसे अपॉन कंप्लीशन ऑफ दिस कोर्स स्टूडेंट्स विल बी एबल टू राइट अ 20-page रिसर्च पेपर। ये गलत चीज है कि द चाइल्ड विल बी एबल टू राइट अ 10-page स्टोरी और 150-word स्टोरी। आप जैसे ये बड़े बच्चों के लिए है, दे विल बी एबल टू राइट अ थीसिस स्टेटमेंट विद अ क्लियर एंड परसुएसिव क्लेम। इसके अंदर हमने क्या देखा कि हमने बच्चों की जो क्लैरिटी है स्टेटमेंट बनाने की, जब बच्चे रिसर्च पेपर बनाते हैं 11th और 12th में, तो ये हमको ये बताना है कि बच्चे जो हैं उनके पास क्लियर पर्सपेक्टिव है कि नहीं, और वो जब लिख रहे हैं अपने कि मैं रिसर्च इस पे करना चाहता हूं, तो वो आपको परसुएट कर सक रहे हैं कि नहीं। डू दे हैव इनफ रिसर्च, डू दे हैव इनफ एविडेंसेस टू प्रूव व्हाट दे आर ट्राइंग टू प्रूव। सो इसमें जो है हमें बच्चों का स्किल एंड कॉम्पिटेंसी देखना है, ये नहीं देखना है कि 200 वर्ड्स या 300 वर्ड्स में वो बच्चे ने ये पेपर या थीसिस जो है वो लिख दिया। सो इफ यू कैन गो नेक्स्ट। सो जब हम गोल्स की बात करते हैं, by the end of the course of the chapter, the students will be able to understand the scientific method. ये आपका गोल हो गया. This is your bigger picture. Scientific method एक बहुत बड़ी चीज है. It's a big picture which carries on class after class after class. So are the children able to do that? वो गोल को आप अपना बुल्स आई रखेंगे. ये जो गोल है, इस गोल के लिए आपने अभी लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स बनाने हैं. सो गोल आपको पता है साइंटिफिक मेथड के लिए, उसका लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या है? द स्टूडेंट्स विल बी एबल टू distinguish between a hypothesis, a theory and a law, define each of the above from a scientific experiment, outline the steps, what are the steps involved in the scientific method, and uske aage jab aap creation pe jate hain, the children will be able to generate predictions based on the outcome. So they will also be able to create their own knowledge, predict their own sort of statements, which is actually going beyond. And finally, they will be able to maintain the distinction between the predicted and the observed result, even if the lab statement fails to produce the expected results. So बच्चों की knowledge इतनी ज्यादा इन डेप्थ में हो गई है कि उन्होंने फिजिकली भी अगर कोई एक्सपेरिमेंट देखी और वो एक्सपेरिमेंट ठीक नहीं है, उनका जो साइंटिफिक टेम्पर है वो इतना स्ट्रांग है that will tell them to repeat the statement, repeat the experiment and do the entire thing again till they get the correct statement. So how are you increasing the scientific method of the children is your goal, and the learning objectives are given below. So I'm now going to enumerate the differences between the two. हमने curriculum की बात करी, फिर हमने big picture की बात करी जो goal है, और फिर हमने गोल में से लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स जो हैं वो कैसे निकलते हैं, क्या होते हैं, उनकी बात करी. सो हमारे पैरामीटर्स ऑफ कंपैरिजन जो है, फर्स्ट जो है वो है स्कोप और टारगेट. जो आपका गोल होता है उसका जो स्कोप है वो ब्रॉड होता है, ऑब्जेक्टिव्स का नैरो होता है. जो टारगेट हम उसको जेनेरिक रखते हैं और जो ऑब्जेक्टिव होता है उसका बहुत स्पेसिफिक टारगेट होता है. पीरियड गोल्स जो आपके हैं वो लॉन्ग रन पे चलते हैं. इट कैन बी फॉर द क्लास, इट कैन बी फॉर द होल स्कूल लाइफ. दे आर बिगर गोल्स टू हैव. एंड जो ऑब्जेक्टिव है वो आपके एक पीरियड के लिए आप सेट करते हैं. टाइम पीरियड कैन बी 1 period, 2 period, 3 periods, or just 1 period as you want to make a lesson plan for one lesson plan. That's okay as well. But you need to know जो आप पीरियड डिफाइन कर रहे हैं वो कितना डिफाइन कर रहे हैं फॉर दैट पर्टिकुलर एक्टिविटी. फंक्शनैलिटी जो गोल है, इट इज द गोल इज द डेस्टिनेशन. That is the place where the children are eventually going to go, and the objective, of course, are the steps taken to achieve that goal. वो जो आपने बड़ा big picture जो आपने सोचा है, उसको अचीव करने के लिए जो छोटे छोटे अचीवेबल मेजरेबल स्टेप्स जो आपने डिफाइन करे हैं वो आपके ऑब्जेक्टिव हो गए. मेजरमेंट जो आप गोल सेट करते हैं वो इतने इजी नहीं होते, बिकॉज दे आर बिग पिक्चर, दे आर ब्रॉडर. उनको मेजर करने में थोड़ा सा मुश्किल होता है. वेयरएज ऑब्जेक्टिव्स जो होते हैं वो इजीली मेजरेबल हो जाते हैं अगर आपने स्मार्ट लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स बनाए. सो जो मेरी कॉन्वर्सेशन अभी जो आपके साथ चल रही है वो ये है कि अगर आपके पास लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स आपने सेट करे हों बच्चे के साथ, स्पेशली अगर आप बच्चों के साथ को कंस्ट्रक्ट करते हैं, तो that actually defines what your learning is happening in the classroom. Hence the importance of learning objectives and learning outcomes. दोनों जो हैं they are very important. So when we take the small steps, they are the learning objectives to achieve the bigger goals that we are describing or keeping for ourselves and our institutions. So if we go next, this is something that I believe very, very, passionately about. How do you construct the learning objectives with the children? So जब आप, for instance, आप बच्चों को solar system पढ़ा रहे हैं, so solar system में आप ये भी कर सकते हैं, please go to your book and open up page number 13. या आप बच्चों को ये कह सकते हैं, okay, let us start with why does day and night happen? So उससे बात से आपकी जो बच्चों की इंक्वायरी निकलेगी, जो बच्चे बात करेंगे, और उसके बाद जब आप बोलोगे ओके हम अर्थ में रहते हैं, मून हमें दिखता है, सन है, तो ऐसे और भी प्लैनेट्स हैं. So there will be some questions which the children will give up. They will try to find out. So those questions can be written out, and those can be your lines of inquiries that the children actually discover for themselves. So जब आप learning objectives लिखते हैं, तो what first जो हमने learning objective की जिसकी हम बात कर रहे हैं कि what makes good writing. So हम बच्चों ने लिखा है कि others can read my writing. My writing is interesting to others, and my writing follows the rules of writing. So whatever rules have been defined in the class, वो जो है मैं उसको ही फॉलो करके मैंने अपनी राइटिंग करी है. जैसे क्लास 12th में थोड़ा बच्चे जो हैं ये सेल्फ रेगुलेशन और सेल्फ रिफ्लेक्शन पे हम लोग ज़्यादा स्किल्स एंड कॉम्पिटेंसी में ज़्यादा उसको वैल्यू देते हैं. तो प्री कैलकुलस में हम बच्चा ये लिख सकता है कि माई रिस्पॉन्स लेट्स अदर्स इनटू माई थिंकिंग. सो मैंने एक माइंड मैप बनाया है, और वो माइंड मैप के थ्रू मैं समझा सकता हूँ कि ये कैलकुलस क्या चीज़ है. सो पीपल कैन think, look into my thinking by looking at the visual strategies that I have used. This is just an example. I'm sure you all have beautiful other examples as well. My response is organized and can be understood by others. So this could be one learning objective. My response shows how topics and areas are linked. So agar aap transdisciplinary integration subject integration करना चाहते हैं, and that is again deeper learning. So अगर वो बच्चा वो बात समझता है कि मैं कैलकुलस कर रहा हूँ और मैं रियल लाइफ में इसको कैसे यूज कर सकता हूँ, इसके क्या क्या यूजेस हैं, इसको हम कैसे आगे इंटीग्रेट कर सकते हैं दूसरे सब्जेक्ट एरिया में. सो अगर बच्चा वो अपना लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव बनाता है, so this is how it will look like. So this was about your curriculum. This was about your goals and your learning objectives. So जब हमारे पास learning objectives आ गए and the children have actually given out what they are going to learn. So जैसे हमने solar system का example लिया था, जहाँ बच्चों ने अपने लिए डिफाइन किया कि हमने क्या पता करना है, और अगर हम वो पता करेंगे तो हमारे ये वाले जो लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स डिफाइंड है ये हम क्लियर कर सकेंगे, टैंजिबली हम दिखा सकेंगे कि ये क्या है, और हमारी अंडरस्टैंडिंग वेदर इट इज थ्रू अ थीसिस पेपर और इट इज अ research paper or it is something an artifact or a diorama that I have created, whatever that I have selected and made, I will be able to give an understanding to the teacher what actually my understanding is, right? So usko karne ke liye you will have to, in your plan you will have to devise certain pedagogies, right? Your strategies. So aapki wo kya strategies hain jo aap apne class mein karwaenge, और वो एज अ रिजल्ट आपके लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स जो हैं आपको मेजर करने के लिए दे विल मेक इट easier for you. Actually, this is your demonstration. How will the children demonstrate their learning? And the planning, of course, you are the mastermind. You are the person who is going to design this amazing activity, this beautiful learning experience, authentic learning experience for the child, and they will be able to assess looking at that. So when you look at the Bloom's taxonomy, if you can go next, I'm sure this is something which is you people have done so many times, but when we talk about progressive pedagogies, some people say remember is not important, it is lower order thinking skill. But we have to understand that there are different kinds of learners in the classroom, and they are at different stages of their learning life. So we have to make sure that the children understand. And how will you make sure? You will have formative assessment embedded in. छोटी छोटी जगहों पे आप एक क्विक जैसे yes no रेड कार्ड और ग्रीन कार्ड या ट्रैफिक लाइट्स, या जैसे बड़े बच्चों के लिए यू कैन से ओके AMP बॉक्स हम लोग कहते हैं एक्टिव मेंटल पार्टिसिपेशन बॉक्स, जिसके अंदर आप सारे बच्चों के नाम रख सकते हैं, और एक बच्चे का नाम निकाला और उसको कहा कि अच्छा आप बताइए, उससे सारे बच्चे जो हैं वो एक्टिवेटेड रहते हैं. सो हाउ विल यू अंडरस्टैंड कि हमारा बच्चा जो है, क्लास में जो बच्चे हैं, मैक्सिमम बच्चे किस लेवल पे हैं? दैट इज योर प्रायर नॉलेज चेक एट द फर्स्ट टाइम व्हेन यू आर डूइंग इट. एंड लेटर जो मैंने ये फर्स्ट लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव की स्ट्रैटेजी या वर्कशीट या एक्टिविटी जो मैंने कर ली, अब बच्चे कहाँ हैं? So these are the various steps you can take according to the children, their own understanding and learning level. Are you going to get them to recall? Are you going to get them to understand? Will you get them to apply this to another situation? Will you get them to analyze? Is it something that do a Venn diagram or do a compare and contrast कि ये सिचुएशन है और ये सिचुएशन है, इसमें लिंक्स निकालिए. सो जब वो लिंक निकालना पड़ेगा दो सिचुएशंस में से, उसमें बच्चों को क्रिटिकली सोचना पड़ता है, देखना पड़ता है कि क्या है ये, कैसे हुआ, या क्या लिंक है इसमें. एंड फाइनली व्हेन दे आर एबल टू क्रिटिक समथिंग, इवैल्यूएट कर सकते हैं कि ये जो हमने पढ़ा, ये इसमें हमें कितना समझ में आया. मेरे लिए तो एक सिंपल एक्टिविटी है, अगर आप बच्चों को कोई मैथ्स का सम करा रहे हैं, तो अगर डिफरेंट स्टेप्स आपने उनको कराए और उनको आपने कहा ठीक है अभी आपने इतने स्टेप्स तक आपने कर लिया, लाइक फॉर इंस्टेंस आपने एडिशन या मल्टीप्लिकेशन ऑफ फ्रैक्शंस कर रहे हैं आप विद लाइक डिनोमिनेटर्स और अनलाइक डिनोमिनेटर्स, तो आप बच्चों को कह सकते हैं कि ये आपके लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स थे, आप कौन से लेवल पे पहुंचे हैं. सो जब बच्चा खुद उसको क्रिटिक करेगा और इवैल्यूएट करेगा, दैट इज योर evaluation of the product that the children are doing. That is self reflection, that is self regulation. तो आप देखिए कितने सारे assessment के जो techniques हैं उसी छोटी सी activity में integrate हो जाते हैं. And finally Bloom's taxonomy और जो बड़े बड़े टेक जायंट्स हैं आजकल, एप्पल कह लीजिए, गूगल कह लीजिए, they are all talking about creation. What is the knowledge, what is the product, what is the prototype that the children are actually creating as a result of this learning experience. So जो हम पहले वाली ग्रिड की हम बात कर रहे थे, जहाँ पे हमारा बॉटम में करिकुलम था, the bigger area of what we have to cover in, or rather discover in our students' life. This is also something which should be a pin wall for you to say, how am I going to take the children from lower learning thinking skills to higher order thinking skills. So this was the background. हमारा जो lesson plan है, जो हमारा learning objectives है, जो हमारा learning experiences हैं, जो progressive pedagogies हैं, this was all the background that I was creating for assessment. So अगर आप assessment, Puchika, if you can change the slide. So if you look at the NEP, basically जो ये चारों webinars हैं वो NEP के ऊपर ही base करे हैं, and we have tried to decipher this, and we have also implemented these in various schools that we work with. जो assessment hai, it's written beautifully. I mean, all of you will agree that the NEP is something that all of us had wished should come and should get implemented as soon as possible. So if you look at it, it says that assessment should be holistic, it should be formative, and it should be competency based. Beautiful. I think when you talk about holistic and formative, you are thinking of the child and nothing else. Competency, of course, you're looking at the workforce, you're looking at what is that the child will learn for life and all. But in the years when the child is learning slowly and gradually, moving from one class to another, the holistic, the complete picture of what the child is learning and doing it in a formative way. Formative is such an amazing assessment way that, the name itself, formative, you're giving constructive feedback, you're helping the child, you're supporting the child. It's not about the marks, it's about my learning. So all of that comes through this beautiful word, formative. So we should actually, and this is directly from the NEP, it talks about promoting learning and development of students by testing higher order thinking skills, that is analysis, critical thinking, and conceptual clarity. And please look at the last sentence very carefully. Assessments should help the schools to analyze. They're actually taking you to higher order yourself. The learning processes. It's not talking about marks and grades. It's talking about also self-reflection on your part as a school, as a principal, as a teacher, that whatever learning processes that I have imbibed, whatever learning processes that I have implemented in the classroom, are they optimizing the learning that is happening in the class? So this is something which is very, very powerful, very powerful. So if we go next. So what is holistic assessment? When we say holistic assessment, what does it mean? So this is actually a derivative of a few research papers and talking to a few people and looking at best practices around the world. When we talk about holistic assessment, it means it's a continuous process. It is something which is ongoing. It is something which will be in a cyclic sort of a form. So if you are doing something wrong, the feedback comes back and it gets driven into the same process with the feedback, and you improve on it. So holistic also means that every child understands the growth development process. You understand every child's growth. You understand every child's development process. And how do you make that possible? When you integrate peer and student assessment, it's automatic. So you are sitting here and say, I've got 45 children in the classroom. How do I make this individual? How do I make it personalized? You can. There are ways and there are strategies to do, work around in your classroom where you can make that assessment personalized, just because there are self-assessments and peer assessments, and that is what NEP talks about as well. You need to assess the individual strengths and challenges that each child is facing. Now, if you look at a diary where the child writes and you are looking at that log, so the self-reflection is happening and you are supporting the child by just learning that. So you will never know what the strength and the challenge the child is facing, but the child knows. You just have to integrate that system, which will help you. You have to analyze and evaluate. That's what NEP says in the last slide that we spoke about, the effectiveness of the learning method. This is what I'm reading out, what learning or holistic assessment means. You have to take constructive feedback from your peers, from your teachers. You have to make sure that the constructive feedback is happening. The environment, very important, is non-threatening. So when you talk about and you try and remember a teacher in your class wherein she always said, that's okay, but let have Arjun say the answer now. This answer seems all right, but can Shweta add to it? Rather than saying you're wrong and that answer which you said was absolutely, something that I was not thinking of listening from you and all. Most teachers do that unknowingly as well. No, that is a wrong answer. So if this environment is non-threatening and the teacher actually creates a classroom where she says it's okay to be wrong, then the children will take those chances. They will value feedback. They will go back to the design board and they will understand that whoever gave me this constructive feedback is something that I need to work on. And this is precisely what design thinking talks about as well, the various iterations, starting with empathy and the prototype, which is going back to the drawing board again and again when you get feedback the way it is. So holistic assessments, we are sort of reintroducing the topic that we are going to talk about in the 4 webinars, is formative. Holistic assessments are always formative. They are backward driven, feedback driven, and they are steering. They take you towards a direction. They are individualized, so that when self and peer evaluation happens, it actually gives you an idea as to what does this particular child need. It needs to be positive. It has to be on the process and not the result. You have to talk about the entire process of learning rather than saying 1 out of 10. This is what you've got. Or you can say, step number 2, Arjun, is somewhere you need to work on, and let's see where we went wrong. So let's discover that. So that is the feedback needs to be positive. And of course, we said it needs to be cyclic, it needs to be continuous, and in most cases, it should be something that you do year after year after year. So having worked in in the international scenario for nearly 8 years, I know that the e-portfolios which start in class 1 and move up to the IB stage and beyond is so useful as a self-reflection tool, as something that the children learn from their own selves. Even if the teacher is not there, they can go into their own e-portfolio, they can look at what they are doing, they can see what the next steps are supposed to be. So cyclic is very important. So in the next few slides, I'm just going to talk about NEP, and I'm going to make a substratum of what we are going to talk about in the next 3 webinars according to this. So when I talk about these things, you will know that yes, this was what we spoke about in the first webinar, and this is the connect to it. So if you look at this figure here, it says that the assessment needs to be holistic, formative, and competency based. It needs to test higher order thinking skills. This is what we've discussed at length just now. We need to promote the learning and the development of students. It needs to promote that. It needs to help the entire school system revising your teaching learning processes to optimize learning and then focus on assessment for learning. So this is also a pinboard for you when you look at NEP and what NEP talks about for the features of assessment. This is something that you need to keep in mind. Please, keep taking notes. There are notes in the Google Classroom as well. But when you are at the end of this webinar today, when you are creating your own concept plan or your lesson plan, these notes will come in handy. So when we are looking at NEP again, and when it talks about transforming the culture of assessment, how do you transform the culture of assessment? So we are looking at the continuous tracking. Puchika, next. The continuous tracking of learning outcomes of each child. We are looking at board examinations to be more flexible with assessment of essential skills. So here your skills and competencies will come into play. You're talking about assessments to focus on core concepts, higher order, and foundational skills. We are looking at an AI-based software to help track the progress of children, to help them make career choices. You are looking at now Parak, which will be bringing greater synergy in the board examinations. We are looking at self-assessment. I spoke about this before, self-assessment and peer assessment, and that is next, the peer assessment. And of course, the NTA, the National Testing Agency, which will work to offer different aptitude tests for the students. So coming on to assessments, we are looking at formative assessment. So what are the various ways? This is a very important deck that we have created. This is something which will help you in creating your lesson plan. So if you want to take notes, we are looking at self-reflection, we are looking at self-assessment, and of course, peer interaction. The formative assessment tries to reveal the student's comprehension, learning, and academic process. We are looking at student orientation towards this entire process. We are looking at using questions, questioning, and meaning making, so that these are some things which will give you a springboard to what the children already know and what they have to learn in the future. That's what formative assessment is. It actually informs you of the next steps. So you are going to use all these evidences, and it takes you to steer the learning process to where you want to take it and give constructive feedback. And of course, once you do this repeatedly, once the entire process of checking and rechecking and modifying your steps based on the constructive feedback that you have received, once that happens, the children automatically get into the self-regulation mode. Now, I'm telling you about formative assessment and summative assessment because that is something which we will be talking about in detail in the next webinar that we have. So if you go on to the next slide, the summative assessments, like all of us know, this is entirely from the perspective of the NEP, what it talks about formative, what it talks about NEP, and what it, summative, and what it talks about the various school sections. So what does it say about, for most of us as teachers are very busy. So I've just culled out information for you all, so that when we talk about assessments, when we talk about creating assessments for our children for authentic learning environment, you will know how does it connect to the NEP. So when we talk about summative assessment, it concentrates on the results. Here we are looking at specific instructions. Especially, we have a very, very well-defined criteria as to what is wrong and what is right, and what are the marks or the grades that the children are going to get. And if you really look at it, the summative is something which is one way, where the teacher talks to the student and lets them know how they have actually learned the process. So if this was Google Meet, we would have a discussion here on the merits of formative and summative assessment. But of course, there will be channels in the Google Classroom where you can put your questions, and we will be talking about them in our next sessions as well. So when you look at NEP, next, Puchika, we are looking at the early years. So I have actually made the keywords bold for you. So when we're talking about the early years and the primary years, it talks about learning and assessment being formative. It talks about it being continuous. It talks about foundation literacy and numeracy. And if you look at it, it also talks about the various forms of assessment, that is as assessment, of assessment, and for assessment. This is also something we will talk about in detail later. How do we transform assessment for student development is the next thing that I want to pinpoint to you, so that your lesson planning becomes easier for you. When you start planning your concept plan or your lesson plan, next, Puchika, your primary purpose of, can you go on to the next slide, please? Should be learning. So it shouldn't be about giving the children a worksheet and giving them 3 out of 10. It is about learning. How do you get them to optimize the learning, and how do you get them to develop? So it is something that NEP talks about, the progress card, which needs to be a 360 multi-dimensional report where the uniqueness of each learner will come out. Now, here also, if you have student reflections and if you have children who are doing peer assessment, it will help you gather that evidence. The evidence is going to be easier for you if you get the children to do peer assessment, if you get them to self-assess, and most importantly, when you are talking about the assessment, it just needs to be much more than this. So when we talk about the holistic report card, or when we talk about the multidimensional report card, please keep in mind that look at ways where the children can actually be involved with the parent in the the reporting process as well. So in one of the schools that I work with, Silverline Prestige School in Ghaziabad, we did a SLC beautifully. The whole school, more than 1,600 children on one day had the student-led conference, and the parents had a rubric as well to evaluate how the children were performing in their demonstration of learning. So the children spoke about what they had learned in the semester, and the parents also gave had a rubric in their hand, and they also gave evaluation for that. So do involve the students in your assessment process. Next, please. So how do you get all of this done? There will be support. There will be an AI-based software which will be given to you. There will be a Parak which will evaluate the performance, the review, analysis, and all of that for holistic development. There will be SAS, the State Achievement Survey, and the NAS, the National Development Survey. And to top it all, we are talking about, next please, we are talking about 50 hours of continuous professional development. So the teachers will be given professional development. They will be given professional development opportunities. They will be talking about assessments. They will be talking about adaptive assessments. They will be talking about competency-based learning, and how you can actually have a holistic view, not only of the assessments that you're dealing about, but also where am I as a teacher, and how am I going to transact all this that NEP is talking about. So when we talk about skills and competencies, I just want to talk to you about this as well before we go on, because when we make the lesson plan, we have to think about the skills and competencies that we have and integrate it in the lesson objective and the learning goal that we have, so that it actually gets assessed. So most of the times what we do is we talk about skills and competencies, but we don't integrate them in our plan. So once you don't integrate them in the plan, they never happen. So the reason why we want to talk about them, if you go next, Puchika. We are talking about skills and competencies, and most of the people say, what's the difference? How do we know that this is a skill and this is a competency? So if you go on to the next slide, Puchika, this is also a ready reckoner for you, where you say what are the skills you have? What is the knowledge that you have about those skills? What are the abilities that you have to actually perform those skills? And those together become the competencies. So you have to make sure that you know the difference. You have to make sure what are the skills that we are talking about, and how do we integrate them in the plan and assess them so that we are actually documenting them. The plain truth is that when you do your lesson plan, when you design the learning activity for the children, it's very important for you to integrate the goal. What are the learning objectives? How am I going to achieve them? Namely, what are the progressive pedagogies that I'm going to use? And what are the skills and competencies that will be tested in this scenario? So your skills, your knowledge of those skills, and your ability to be able to perform, to be able to execute, to be able to showcase that skill is your competency. How well do you do that? So if you go on to the next slide, Jika, I've given an example of some values, that is your the skill sets that you need. So I have just looked at beauty and aesthetics, because that is something very vague, and that is something you actually don't relate to education per se, but that is something which is so important. So when you're looking at the skills for cleanliness, respect for the environment, being artistic, being elegant, or elegance is a skill, and you're looking at authentic learning, project-based learning, or critical thinking and communication, how do these translate into competencies? So this is a small example, again, from a work of very, very intensive research, where we are developing the skills and competencies, and the school is actually implementing them grade-wise from foundation up till class 12, where we are looking at these are the skills, these are the related competencies, and how are we going to integrate it in a particular session. So if you really look at it, if you really look at, suppose it is project-based learning, and the ability to demonstrate perfection at project work, that becomes your aesthetics. That becomes your the beauty of the entire project that you are trying to do. So try and cull out what are the skills and competencies that you want to relate to in your particular class, in your particular school. Get a progression of it, and then you try and implement it in your lesson plan, because if it ain't there, it's not going to be done. So please ensure that that is done in a way that it is assessed. So I am looking at a few things today that needs to come together in a lesson plan, and in the next 3 webinars we are going to use these things and put them in wherever space that we think in your own understanding you think that they should go. So what is the design process, the lesson design process? So if you're looking at learning objectives, you're looking at the various strategies, and you're looking at skills and competencies, how do you put it in the entire lesson process? So if you can take this forward, there is a 4-step process that we should follow. We have looked at various things starting at 3:30. It's been nearly an hour. We are looking at the various components, the various elements. So the 4-step process that you need to follow is, first you need clarity on the purpose. What do you want the children to learn, and why does this learning matter? So what is it going to take you towards? So once you have identified the goal or the intention of the lesson, then you look at assessment. How will this goal be achieved? What will be the artifact? What will the child produce at the end of it? Then is your assessment. Then is your strategy. What are the various strategies that you're going to use in the entire process? And finally, what are the learning experiences and resources which are best supported for achieving this goal or this intention? So this is your first way of doing it. Some people also get the lesson objectives. What are the learning goals, and after learning goals, learning objectives of this lesson. They look at the progressive strategies. Then after looking at the progressive strategies, they look at what are the kinds of assessments, or these two can be done together as well. And finally, you look at what's going to happen. So what is the strategy that you're going to do, and what will happen in each of these lessons. So I will request Puchika now to open up the Word document that I had shared with you. So all these things now come together into this Word doc, and I have also shared this in the Google Classroom. So please open up the Google Classroom and the second one. Oops, give me a minute. Yeah, I've given you the access. Can you refresh it? Yeah, beautiful. The magic of Google here. Okay, so this is the concept map. This is just an idea. This is just a suggestion. I'm sure you have your own templates as well in school. Please feel free to use those. I'm just giving you suggestions as to what can be done when you are creating a concept map or a concept plan or a lesson plan, whatever that you want to call it. So of course, you need to give the owner, who's the owner, so that if somebody has a question or needs to ask something about it. So who's the teacher, who's the department, what was the previous topic, and what is the topic now? So it gives you a background of that as well. And then you have what are the various weeks that you're going to do it with. Now, please see very carefully. The first column has the objectives. So this was created by my director academics, Mrs. Patania, who is a social science person. So she has created a social science one. So she has written whatever are the learning objectives for this particular lesson that she has. Then if you see, she's put in the skill sets. What are the skills that are going to be tested? What are the skills which are going to be demonstrated? What are the skills that are going to actually be tangibly visible in this lesson? So what are those skill sets? So those are enumerated here. And as I said, there are various ways of lesson planning. So in this one here, she's looked at the objectives and she has put in her assessment strategies. How will she know that these objectives have happened? She has put in her methodology for assessing that right on the top. And this is a working document. It doesn't end here. You work with the children and you can go back to it. This is a Google Doc. Your colleagues can come onto it. You can share this with your supervisor. You can, work together collaboratively and create this. So all of it is done as you go. So you pre-plan your lesson and your learning objectives and your strategies. And if things change a little in the classroom, you do those changes. Then the keywords, what are the keywords that the children will learn? And then if you look on the left-hand side, she talks about the learning activities. So those strategies, the progressive strategies that you're going to use in your lesson plan. And finally, what is your success criteria? How are you going to ensure that this has actually happened? And your learning outcomes. What are those things which have actually happened as a result of the teaching learning which happened in your classroom? So 2 pages of this very clean and concept, so lots of strategies she's put in, and according to that, she's put in the learning outcomes. If the children are able to perform this, this is what they is the learning outcome of the entire session that she has planned. So very slowly, if we can repeat this, Puchika, from the beginning. So we have the learning objectives, we have identified skills and the assessment. So assessment is always the engine which drives your learning. And then if you go down, there are some keywords, important words, which should come in the communication in the classroom while this chapter is on, so that the children get used to the vocabulary. Then we have the strategies, the progressive learning strategies. We have the the criteria, the success criteria, and finally the learning outcomes. So this is one way of planning your learning in a very, very essential and a very simple way. I would suggest that we understand all of this. There are notes in the Google Classroom. Please do have a look at them. Get your understanding of the lesson planning process really well ingrained. And from the second webinar, we will start talking about assessing these various things. How do we assess? So finally, if we can go back to the presentation and the next slide, please. Yeah, the one next to this. Yeah, this is, we have already explained this. So yeah, so here we have the assessment cycle. So if you look at first, we refine and define, or rather we define and redefine what our learning objectives are going to be. Then we select the various strategies. So this is the previous model that we spoke about right at the beginning. What are the various strategies that are going to happen? What is the criteria that you're going to set? And what are the rubrics? And it's better if you do this with the children. What is the implementation? How do you measure? How do you create those activities? How do you gather the evidence? How do you analyze whatever the children have done, whether they are going the right way or not the right way? What do you have to do next if they're not going right? So all of that you need to evaluate, analyze the evidence that you have collected. Then you have to evaluate the learning outcomes. What are the learning objectives? Did they get done those are your learning outcomes. So objectives directly are linked to the learning outcomes. You again identify what was achieved and what was not achieved. So you identify the gaps, and then you go into the cyclic thing again. So whatever was not achieved is made into a learning objective again, and the same cycle is repeated. So this is something which is again a pinboard for you, wherein you can look at the assessment cycle. And I wanted to talk about the lesson planning, because that is something which you need to understand. Whatever the template that your school has, it's okay. But there are various things, there are various very, very pertinent and important things which need to be there in your lesson plan. So please make sure that you have those those keywords which are required in the lesson planning. And of course assessment we will discuss, but the planning process is something which should be clear to everybody. And there is a template, the lesson planning template that we showed is there in your Google Classroom. So please make sure that you see that, because that's your substratum, and we will build on it on the 4 days that we meet. And hopefully by the end of the 4 webinars, we will be quite adept with what needs to be done with assessment according to the NEP 2020. So if you go on onto the next slide, please. This is the next webinar, that is planning to assess the learning. We've just had keeping the learning in mind, keeping the end in mind just now. So we spoke about planning in, in specific details. So in the second webinar, we will be talking about how to take this planning further to assess the keyword being assess the learning that is happening in the classroom. So the objectives for that webinar, if we go next, Puchika, is we will be looking at different progressive pedagogies with assessment in mind. So we will look at progressive pedagogies like we touched upon them today, but we will look at what are the various ways that this can be assessed. We will learn how to match assessment with the various pedagogies. So what's the link? We will look at criteria for rubrics. How do you create a rubrics? What are the different kinds of rubrics? And how do we develop the rubrics along with the children, so that it gets them, serves as a guide for them to assess and to articulate the the expectation for any assignment which is given to them. So how do you get children to create their own sense of what is that I'm learning and how will I learn it? At the end, I have Linoit exit slip. So if you can open that, Puchika, there is a slip that we have, and I would request CBSE if you can just post that into the chat, and the people, if now or later, if you can just Puchika, is it there? The last one, the last slide. Go next. Yeah, if you look at the speaker notes on this slide, there is a link. And I want all of you, we are meeting on 26, there's 26 now, so there are 3-4 days. If you want anything specific that needs to be, discovered by us as a community, please let me know what that is. And I will look at these exit slips from the learning today. And if you can give your feedback on that, I will try and integrate those questions and queries and add them to the subsequent sessions that we have. So that's it from me today. And I hope you have a good and enriched substratum to work on for the assessments that we are looking at. We have looked at the big picture, actually, the curriculum. We have looked at what are the learning goals. We have looked at strategies, how do they fit in. We have looked at the learning objectives, the learning outcomes, and we have also looked at what NEP is saying about assessment. So this is a base for us to understand as to what is that that should be implemented in the schools in the years to come, to be able to bring into life the beautiful document on assessment that has been given to us by the NEP. So hope this webinar has set a base for it for you, and I hope to see you on the 26th for the webinar where we start talking about assessment in relation to the progressive pedagogies, and we will learn how to create a rubric for assessment. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in.